I remember someone said to me once, "You seem to specialize in helping people trying to get into the Christian faith or trying to get out of the Christian faith."
You're listening to Good Faith Weekly. I'm Mitch Randall.
And I'm Missy Randall.
We're here each week exploring the intersection of faith and culture.
We find people who stand up, speak out, and step forward.
For inclusion, freedom, and justice for all.
It's time for Good Faith Weekly.
Brought to you by Good Faith Media. Welcome to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, Missy and I have an unexpected guest show up at our house. And then later on the pod, we sat down with Brian McLaren. Brian's got a brand new book out titled Life After Doom. It is a fascinating conversation that you're not going to want to miss. Stay tuned. Hello there, Missy.
Hey, how are you?
I'm well, and you?
Well.
Well, that's a deep well.
Okay, so we have a story to tell.
We
right?
do have a story to tell.
Okay, just as of 5 minutes ago.
And the good news, it doesn't involve an airplane at all.
It doesn't. Okay. So we were off last week, yes?
Yes.
And we were attending the meeting of the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship, which was wonderful.
Oh, had a great time.
And while, our audience is pretty vast and wide, we do have a good segment of this, group of this community that is our listenership, followers, and things like that. But I found myself while we were at this meeting 4 times in the elevator with folks I didn't know, but clearly we
Just
all had
4
the name.
times?
Well, I mean,
I
4
get it,
times in particular, we all had the badges, but people I
right.
didn't know. And folks would strike up a conversation with me saying, hey, I listen to your podcast. And so we'd start talking.
I know you love this.
and unbeknownst to me, every time people were asking us about our home reno project,
Yes.
which, I think people kind of get tired of hearing this, but apparently not, because everybody wanted an update. And while I was hoping not to have anything to update, boy, do I have a doozy of a story for y'all today.
It is a great story.
So, for all of you elevator folks who are asking for an update,
Here we go.
So I had actually something else. I had another update prepared that we'll have to wait for another time because this totally is better than what I had planned. So we are getting ready for our interview today. Mm-hmm. And, it's summertime.
It is summertime. Hot.
Drinking lots of water.
Lots of water.
We are recording.
Stay hydrated, people. Stay hydrated.
We are recording inside the house we are currently renovating because the room that you're officing in is fine.
Yeah.
And we have one bathroom that is functioning fine, another one that we weren't real sure about the plumbing in, but
we have to step over holes to get to these bathrooms.
Sure.
But that's another story.
But anyway,
Yeah.
So I needed to go to the bathroom real quick. And so I went to the middle bathroom, which you were like, no, I've been using it. It's fine. It's
fine.
working, right?
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
I go in there, again, TMI, but use the bathroom real quick.
Right.
Again, lots of water. Came back in here, then you went for your turd, and you came back and you said, what'd you say?
I said, we need a plumber.
And I said, okay, why? And you said,
We have a frog in the toilet.
we have a frog in the toilet. The toilet that I was just sitting on 30 seconds ago.
And mind you, we've gotten the all clear from the plumber saying
The plumber
no
had said it
problems
was
with the
fine.
plumber.
Clear. It is not fine. I had just gone in there, and again, I look everywhere I go, so I'm pretty confident that frog was not in there, but I don't know for sure.
You have no idea how much money I would have paid for a screech to come from the rest of the room while you were in there.
So as we speak, you guys, there is a frog in the toilet. And I don't know. We cannot figure out how to get it.
And he's having the time of his life, by the way.
So,
he's swimming, doing backstrokes.
Again, you come in here and break that news to me 5 minutes before we are to go on with our interview with Brian McLaren today.
We're talking about doom.
Right. Here it is. This is our doom. So you guys, I just thought that Kat was the only thing I had to worry about, the only creature I had to worry about in this house. I was completely wrong.
No.
I need Cat to come back. At least I can see
So now we have cat and frog.
hear Cat when Cat is here. Cat is very vocal. I love that. Lets you know that Cat is here.
Yeah.
Now we have this frog that he can't really probably jump out because of the way the toilet rim is. So we're trying to like parse this out. Like, how are we going to get him out? How's he going to get out? We don't know, because you tried to flush the toilet and the water didn't like wash him down. We just don't know what to do.
No, it didn't. I did open the toilet just before recording this podcast, and
I cannot believe we're having this conversation.
and he got a little spooked by my presence and like swam down in the bottom of the toilet.
Oh, so he's
I don't know where he went. He may be back. I'll have to go check on him here in a second.
sorry.
Well,
No,
never mind.
not literally. Okay. So, you guys, this toilet will never be used by me again, essentially. Clearly.
we're gonna have to scrap the demo. We're moving.
Right? Anyway, so there's currently a frog in the toilet and we don't know what to do, but this is what is all consuming in my mind at this moment. So here we are.
So any listeners have any advice on how to get rid of frogs in the toilet?
That's what I was going to ask. I know we ask for reviews, for likes, for shares, spread. No, I don't need any of that this week. All I need is for you guys to...
We don't even want a donation.
No. Email info@goodfaithmedia.org, Missy@goodfaithmedia.org, Mitch@goodfaithmedia.org. I don't care. However you have to get hold of us, tell us how to get a frog out of the toilet. We don't know.
Oh my gosh.
Anyways, which honestly just leads so perfectly into our conversation with Brian McLaren today. Because his book, first of all, I'll just start, kind of the transition with a Bible verse. We should read from the Bible, clearly.
I cannot wait to hear where this is going.
So Psalms 104, 24, and 25, as you'll recall.
Oh, yes,
I'm
of
sure
course.
you know what it is, right? It says, all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, the Lord God made them all.
So the Lord made little Froggy and put him in your life.
So it's very funny because one of the questions that we talk about with Brian was about the meaning of dominion, as we're told about in Genesis, and that basically what how we were taught growing up about what dominion meant versus his interpretation of dominion, which I adhere to today. Right. And I just want to say we clearly do not have dominion over our
Don't you have a dominion over our toilet?
No.
Oh my gosh. Well, you and I did have a fascinating conversation with Brian McLaren. He's got a new book out called Life After Doom. And
I feel like that's just the title of our life right now. Is it not?
It seems like we're life in doom right now.
Right. I just hope there's life after the doom part, because that's kind of where we're marinating right now.
After cats, after frogs. Who else knows what else?
Sweet Jesus, there cannot be any more creatures in here. I mean, I don't even want to know what's next, you guys.
But God made them all.
I know. They're all God's creatures. We are one with the earth. It's fine.
So let's just get in our zen as we prepare to talk to Brian about his new book.
Absolutely. You don't want to miss this conversation. It's fascinating.
Stay tuned. Hey friends, it's Mitch Randall, CEO of Good Faith Media. We've been hard at work producing a new podcast for our friends over at Free Mom Hugs.
Well, Mitch, disclaimer.
Yeah?
You and Cliff have been hard at work. I'm mostly just here for color commentary. Let's just be honest about that.
Very, very true.
But for those who may not know, the nonprofit Free Mom Hugs, founded by Sarah Cunningham, empowers the world to celebrate the LGBTQIA+ community through visibility, education, and conversation.
And perhaps you've heard about their work. They do indeed offer free hugs and high fives. They stand in at weddings, all of it helping people who have experienced rejection for being who they are.
Their new podcast is titled Pride 365, Keeping Queer Kids Alive. A new episode will drop each Wednesday during the month of June, which is Pride Month.
But Pride 365 is about more than a month. It's about a movement and the moms keeping queer kids alive.
The first episode drops June 5th, and it's hosted by Free Mom Hug's very own saints, Sarah Cunningham and Katrina Cobb.
Pride 365, Keeping Queer Kids Alive, a new podcast produced by Good Faith Media for Free Mom Hugs.
Learn more at freemomhugs.org and goodfaithmedia.org.
Welcome back to Good Faith Weekly. On this episode, we've got a very special guest with us. Brian McLaren is an author, speaker, activist, and public theologian, a former college English teacher and pastor. He passionately advocates for a new kind of Christianity, just, generous, and working with people of all faiths for the common good. He is an Auburn Senior Fellow, a We Stand with Love contributor, and a leader in the Convergence Network. More germane for us here at Good Faith Media, Brian is one of the writers and thinkers in my life, providing a new way to think about faith and life. In other words, you can blame Brian for all of my heretical ways. His latest book is Life After Doom, and it is currently in bookstores. Brian, welcome to Good Faith Weekly.
Happy to be back with you.
So, Brian, Mitch got his opportunity to kind of gush a little bit, and I would like a moment of personal privilege to do that myself, if that's all right. So, I want to just say that with the exception of the fact that you possess infinitely more IQ points than I do, I'm feeling now after reading you, our brains kind of work in the same way. So I don't know if you ever recall, but last time we spoke with you, I talked about our inner fundamentalist, and you introduced me to my own inner fundamentalist, and I am convinced they would have been fast friends. I felt that deep in my core. With this latest book, you introduced me to my committees and my board of directors in my mind. And I just thought this was just such a mind-blowing kind of concept for me, but I appreciated it because Mitch teases me all the time about the voices in my head and the conversations that I have. And you so perfectly defined this for me. And I appreciate it so much because my brain is essentially a Baptist church committee meeting with all the just dysfunction that entails. So, I don't know. I know it sounds silly, but I just think to teach us that and make sense of those internal struggles is so important. And I love the way that you kind of walk us through that and do that. So there's my moment. I had 60 seconds, Mitch. Did I make it?
Yeah,
okay.
55. Good job.
Okay. So
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, I just really appreciate the way you kind of help us understand those, like I said, those inner struggles. But you begin this book by letting the readers know that it differs a little bit from your previous works. And you actually give the reader permission in the beginning to skip ahead to later chapters if they're not in a place to take the first part of the book. So I wondered if you would share a little bit about how the book differs, what motivated you to write it, and why did you give the reader permission to skip ahead?
Yes. Well, maybe I can say something about that first. I think we've all had a conversation with somebody where they say, I have some good news and some bad news.
Right.
Which do you want first? And so in a sense, what I'm doing in this book is I'm giving you the really bad news at the beginning. And then everything after that is to try to help us to understand the bad news, cope with the bad news, and see the opportunities that are presented by that. But for some people, they have so much bad news in their lives already, they just can't take any more bad news right now. And I understand that. So I wanted to give people an easy out permission and an acknowledgement that, a lot of people, their lives are just so tough. I remember going through periods in my life where I would open my email inbox and I would think, I cannot take one more problem. Mm-hmm. And I would just look through the email and say, I'm not even going to read that one. I just don't have any bandwidth for somebody's complaint or attack or insult or whatever it was, right? So I understand when people think I've got enough to deal with. But what is different about this book, one thing is this. I have written most of my books as a Christian trying to help my fellow Christians or people. I remember someone said to me once, you seem to specialize in helping people trying to get into the Christian faith or trying to get out of the Christian faith. But I realized in this book, I'm writing about things that are just equally relevant to all of us as human beings. And so I can't change who I am as a person of faith and spirituality in approaching the subject, but I was very aware that I was writing this book for any human being who's alive right now.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And so I love the point where you said, this book will be here, or this portion of the book will be here when you're ready, and I thought that I just really appreciated that kind of disclaimer. And then, you talk about who this book is for. And like you said, it's for a broader, I feel like, audience. But then you also talk a little bit about who it's not for, which I found kind of comical myself. Who are some of the people that you think this may not be for?
Yes. So this book talks about global crises, and one of the central global crises that we face is climate change. Mm-hmm. And there are a whole lot of people who don't believe in climate change. And I'm not writing this book to try to convince them. This is just because they don't think that's a real problem. They're not going to read a book like this, and I don't expect them to. And it would only make them mad because they would have to read page after page that takes something seriously that they don't take seriously. So I want to talk with the people who are open. Here's the thing I'd say. People who believe things or don't believe things have reasons for believing them and not believing them. I'm not trying to convince people of things they aren't ready to or aren't able to or don't have permission to think.
Well, Brian, thanks for opening that door, because there are a lot of people, especially people of faith now, who are considering the ramifications of climate change and global warming. And so one of the things that you mention is that moment of awakening for you personally, and also the possibility of awakening for other people. And you travel around the country, around the world, talking to fellow sojourners of faith. And do you get a sense now that because of the tangible realization of the weather changing, and we're sitting here at the end of June, and Washington D.C.'s already hit 100. We're sitting here at 103 in Norman, Oklahoma. Down in McAllen, Texas, they've already hit 115 degrees. We're seeing this intense heat. We're seeing the weather changing before our eyes. Are you seeing an awakening in some people's minds and hearts that, you know what, there is something to this global crisis that we've been talking about for decades now?
I think there are a lot of people who are having an awakening. They thought it was real, but they thought it was in the future. And what they're awakening to is, oh, it's real now. It's not in the future. It's a present reality. The people who are part of religious and political groups that don't allow them to believe in this,
right?
The interesting thing is they can't think about it until they decide they're willing to leave the group. Mm-hmm. That right now is very precious to them. There's an awful lot of religious groups and political groups that have the characteristics of a cult. And when you're part of a cult, other people do your thinking for you. They tell you they create a set of bounds, and you're not allowed to think outside those bounds. I don't see a lot of people changing that yet. Mm-hmm. But I think the time will come. But people go pretty far. They stay in their cult. I mean, some people stay in their cult until they drink the Kool-Aid, right? So, that's still out there.
One of the things that I guess gives me hope, Brian, and this is kind of a strange juxtaposition to go from this point to give you hope, is that during the global pandemic, there was a lot of COVID deniers, a lot of cynicism when the vaccine was first introduced.
Yes.
But then you talk to individuals who actually had contracted COVID, who were deniers. And sitting on their deathbed, they said, you don't want this. You go get vaccinated. Do you think... Do you feel as though maybe we're getting close to that tipping point when it comes to climate change because of the intensity of what we're experiencing ecologically?
I hope so. And I think I think for people who, let's say they were mildly concerned about it,
right.
I think many of them are becoming more concerned about it and maybe extremely concerned about it. But boy, the power of denial when it
Yeah.
faces group membership has remarkable resilience in the world of religion, in the world of politics. Yeah, it's just a strange thing. I wish it weren't so powerful, but my experience watching it in myself and in others tells me
Sure.
it's pretty darn powerful.
Yeah. You're
But
absolutely right.
uh, but you know, yeah, and this is what we live at such an interesting time, don't we?
Hmm.
We just don't know how these things are going to turn out. And
Right.
uh, there are reasons why people who experience things as very real start denying them when the evidence becomes even more powerful. Um, I'll give you an example. Uh, I have friends who have had very serious diseases like cancer, for example. Uh, and when they were diagnosed with cancer, they never had to deny the reality of cancer
Right. Yeah.
before.
Yeah.
But when they got the diagnosis, then suddenly the psychological characteristics of denial rose up in them. And so they would then say, God's going to heal me of this. And they would be in a kind of a spiritual bypassing. They couldn't even think about this reality. They would just rush from one faith healer to another, to another,
Hmm.
to another, right? Um, uh, so, yeah, it's sometimes when the symptoms and the evidence is even more intense, the denial becomes more intense.
That is such, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to marinate on that for a minute because that's such an interesting parallel that you bring in, and so true that you think you know this exists, but then when it happens to you, the number of ways in which we mentally gymnastics ourselves into a point of denial because we don't want to think those things can affect us. So,
Yes.
okay, give me a minute. I'm gonna have to, and we'll start in with the next question. Okay, Brian, there you go. Always making me think. So I want to talk about something else that relates to the overarching theme of the book. There's so much rich content in here, and we talked a lot before we came on about what we should hone in on because we want to talk about all of the things. But something that I double highlighted and underlined was a portion that you talked about dominion. And and I thought this was such a great, just kind of a 30,000 foot view of one of the ways we got to where we are. And as you know, noted in the beginning, I love a good reframing, and that's one of the things I just appreciate so much about you. So I wondered if you would talk to us about dominion, remind us of how we were taught to interpret dominion as it's noted in Genesis,
Yes.
and then talk to us about your thinking about dominion now and how that is really a better outlook.
Missy, that gives me a chance to maybe say two things about reading the Bible. The first thing is some of us were taught we have to read the Bible literally. I was taught that. I believe that. I was a preacher for many years, and I tried to work by that set of rules. I eventually felt that wasn't a helpful set of rules, and I found all kinds of evidence in the Bible to not read the Bible literally. There were some parts of the Bible that were very obviously not literal, and so so that's the first question. Do you feel you have to take the Bible literally? The second part, though, is to realize that there are multiple ways to interpret a lot of things in the Bible. And so even if you take it literally, you have a whole lot of options in how to interpret it. But here's the thing. Certain pastors or ministers or whatever, they tell you you have to take the Bible literally and you have to interpret it the way that they interpret it, right? And so that's why I love this question, because it gives us a chance to look at this thing in the very first chapter of the Bible. God creates human beings and gives them dominion over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air and so on. Well, that word dominion was interpreted by a whole lot of people to say dominion means you're in charge. You have power over. You can do with it what you wish. It's under your control. You're superior, it's inferior. And that way of thinking made a whole economic system possible, made a whole system of domination possible. It made white people feel they had permission to dominate Black people. It made rich people feel they had permission to dominate poor people. It made men feel they had permission to dominate women. So this idea of dominion was very, very far reaching. And it was a passage of the Bible that people love to quote to justify what they were doing. Here's a totally different way to look at that story. The story emerges in the ancient world of empires. And in empires, all empires, the pyramids are like a great metaphor of empires. There's one person at top, and then a few people just below that person, a few more, and the masses of people are at the bottom of the pyramid. The power and wealth are concentrated at the top, and all the work is done by the people. The hard labor is done by people at the bottom, right? The Bible begins with God creating the poorest people of all, people with no clothes, people with no land, the most primitive, uncivilized people of all in the ancient world are pictured as being image bearers of God. I mean, that's just stunning to think about that. And so when those people are given dominion, you could say, well, if God loves the world, if God values the world, God's seen the world and calls it good. I mean, you get the feeling in Genesis 1, God's kind of thrilled with this whole world. And even before there are people, and there are certainly no religions or churches, just when there's light and darkness, it's good. And when there's land and water, it's good. And, day and night, it's all good. And God gets in and says, it's very good. If God thinks the world is good and has value, and we think of God as being the king, and God says, you're in my image, then we should exercise the same kingly care over the earth as God would exercise. Well, that doesn't mean exploit. That doesn't mean use. That doesn't mean crush. That doesn't mean destroy, burn up, all the rest. It means have respect for this beautiful world. So all that's to say, however you interpret that text, you don't have to interpret it as a carte blanche to be destructive and domineering. Does that help? Does that go?
It does. And I loved that section of the book. And to me, it just kind of set the foundation for flipping the script, so to speak, and looking at the world and our responsibility to it and for it in a completely different way than kind of, the underlying tenor, like you said, of what we were taught, that there are the folks at the top, and that is, a white man. And then the rest of us fall somewhere underneath. So I don't know. I loved that thinking. And I loved kind of setting that as a foundation for what we're talking about today.
Brian, as you described just moments ago, the first humans as the Hebrew Bible talks about, you used very descriptive language in talking about what a white culture would define as the poorest of the poor, those who had no clothes, those who really walked within a culture of indigenous ways.
Yes.
And you bring that up in your book. I'm a citizen of the Muskogee Creek tribe. And as I read your insertion of indigenous wisdom into this conversation when it comes to dominionism as well as the ecological crisis we face, I couldn't help but hear the echoes of my ancestors.
Yes.
My great-grandmother was a resident of a boarding school, ripped from her family, pretty much tortured to assimilate into this type of culture.
Yeah.
I also talked to relatives who mention, when I would ask them, what is the largest difference between our culture and the white culture? And they would always go back to one point, and that was land ownership. How can a person own the land when it was there before them and will be there long after them? This conversation about inserting indigenous wisdom into the overall conversation within the ecological crisis, but even within the framing of a new type of Christianity, as you've talked about for decades now. The one thing that I've been asking for decades is, how can indigenous people and people from African descent embrace a faith that killed them and enslaved them? And it goes back to your point in the book. They are able to identify with those characters because they themselves were indigenous. And there is this indigenous connection between the reader who is indigenous and the characters that they discover in the Bible. Can you talk more about that? Because that was so important to me.
Well, first, thanks for sharing that. Yes. And what you said, Mitch, about in the indigenous view, we belong to the land. And in the colonizer's view, the land belongs to us. In the indigenous view, we have a responsibility to the land to care for the land so the land will continue to care for us and care for future generations. The colonizer's view is the very opposite. You exploit the land, get all the profit out of it, and then you move somewhere else and exploit that land and get all the profit out of it. You couldn't have two more different ways of looking at the world. But let me, if I could just do a quick tangent.
Sure.
And again, I'm not trying to defend the colonizer's view at all. But if we look at European history and think about the Europeans who are coming to the United States, they came from a period of domination where it was understood that the king owned all the land. And in fact, there were some horrible laws in parts of Europe. I mean, I don't know if I'm even allowed to bring this up, but when a couple got married, the king could have the first sex with the new bride.
Yeah.
Wow.
As an expression of the king's ultimate absolute ownership, and anybody else got to own land as a privilege, got to inhabit and use land as a privilege that was bequeathed to them by the king. You can understand when people are trying to escape from that kind of domination, what they say is, well, let's let every person, let's be honest, let's let every man.
Yeah, there you go.
And by giving land ownership to more people, it was a way of defying the dominating power of the king. So you can see why that seemed like freedom to people. But now we're at this place where when we give ownership of people to land so that they can harm it in ways that our ancestors couldn't even imagine, suddenly we realize, oh, we need such a deep rethinking.
You were talking, I kept thinking about Roger Williams as he left England and went, to New England. And there's that famous quote of his, and I'm going to butcher it, but, I left the land of one oppression to arrive on the shores of another. This discovery of how you mentioned at the beginning of this interview, how powerful these systems are that we take with us. And they're so powerful, a lot of the times we become what we detest.
Yes.
And that's that seems to be where we are today. But this indigenous wisdom is this symbiotic understanding of humanity's place in the larger creation.
Yes.
And I often talk, Lakota spiritualist Lenore Three Stars out of Oregon has been really hammering this to me lately about moving Christianity away from a theology of conversion, which is really assimilation, to a theology of wholeness, where we come into this divine presence as community to work on healing what is broken. That's an entirely different mindset, Brian, and I just love it.
Oh my goodness, it is it's so different, and it's so beautiful.
Yes.
Oh my goodness, it's so beautiful. There is only one book I've ever read that I thought this book ought to be in the Bible, and it wasn't what I wrote.
Is it yours? Because it might be
Life After
for
Doom?
me.
It wasn't what I wrote. It was Braiding Sweetgrass by Robin Wall Kimmerer.
She's working on a new book, Brian. It should be out soon.
Oh, that's so great. But she tries to articulate this reverence for the land and this reverence for all of life and this sense that we human beings are part of the web of life. We are not above it, you know. And a place where I saw this expressed beautifully is in the Haudenosaunee Thanksgiving ritual or Thanksgiving protocol, which she quotes in the book, in which the Haudenosaunee elders, native peoples of upstate New York and the Finger Lakes region, they have shared this Thanksgiving ritual that anyone in the world, they've said, look, if you use this, you're not appropriating. We're giving it to you. We want you to use it.
Right.
And what I love about it is the Thanksgiving starts by, I won't have this in the right order, but it says things like this. First, we thank the waters for doing all the things that waters do first. Next, we thank the sky and the clouds for doing all the things. Next, we thank the trees for doing the things they do. We thank them and we honor them, and we thank the fish of the waters, and we go, and then at the end it thanks the Great Spirit for giving us these things. And what I love is it doesn't thank God and forget about the creatures. It thanks the creatures first, and then says, and it's through this goodness of our fellow creatures that we understand the goodness of God, and we speak of God in a meaningful way only after we speak of our fellow creatures. There's something about that just feels so right to me.
It is so beautiful, and I'm going to invite you right now to Oklahoma City to walk with me through the First Americans Museum, because the first exhibit within that museum is you sit in this theater and indigenous voices tell you about their creation narratives.
Yes.
And there is this running theme of humanity coming from the earth. And there is, in almost all of the stories, this presence of other creatures helping humanity along. Yes. And it's just beautiful. It's just, I remember preaching that one time in Birmingham, Alabama, and telling some of these stories from my ancestors, the Creeks and Cherokees, and you could just see the astonishment on white faces in Birmingham. Wow, that sounds very familiar to a mud story I have read about in Genesis.
It is just amazing, isn't it?
Yeah.
And then you see, the Hebrew scriptures are indigenous wisdom.
Exactly.
And we have totally learned how to rob them of all that indigenous wisdom and turn them into something else. But yeah, it really is. It is a beautiful thing. Years ago, I taught one weekend. I taught 2 weekends of courses. The first weekend on the Hebrew scriptures, second weekend on the Christian scriptures, and I started the weekend by reading about 5 indigenous creation stories from North America, Africa, and I think I had one from Asia. And then read the Genesis, the 2 Genesis narratives, which we have, by the way, and it was just a wonderful experience, because what students got to do then is they got to feel the common themes running through these stories. Yeah.
So I want to say the mark of a good conversation is how far we go off script. And I'm sitting here just listening to you two. Like you could offer an invitation and I'd be walking forward right now.
Well, there's your inner fundamentalist coming up.
Oh, wait, okay. We got to tell her to be quiet again. But I will say that I let Mitch take the question about the indigenous theme of this book because, obviously. But I wanted to ask it so bad. But what I really want to do is say that I think it's chapters 8 and 9, where you give the overview of the Bible from an indigenous perspective, should be required reading for anybody who grew up in church. I mean, Mitch and I have talked so much about this, but the way you just so beautifully in 30 or 40 minutes gave the entirety of Scripture from an indigenous narrative was just, it was amazing. So thank you for that gift to me. But like I said, I let him have the question about that.
Well, thanks, Missy. Can I just say, and I wouldn't have been able to do that if it weren't for the blessing in my life of many indigenous friends who've been my teachers and helped me see what was there that I couldn't see for most of my life. So yeah, and hopefully more and more of us, because here's the thing. All of us used to be indigenous somewhere
There you go.
before we were colonized. And this is something that we have to get back to.
And just the realization of how baked in it is that somebody has to point out something so very obvious to us. It's just, it continually is invigorating and also just frustrating, and maddening and all those things. But I love every time that you give me that perspective. But I wanted to kind of switch gears a little bit because I have a bit of a confession that as of this morning, I hadn't quite finished the book and had about 30 minutes left and thought, oh, it'll be fine. I don't need to. And I thought, no, I'm going to. So I put my earbuds in and went to run some errands while I finished. I am so glad I did, because you talked about at the end of the book having an epiphany, and it was so relatable to one that I had about a year ago. My mom was nearing the end of her life. She had battled early onset dementia for many years. And sorry. as she was dying, I remember having this epiphany about life as energy and what happens once we die. And you mentioned that in the book. And I don't know. I want you to talk about that, and also talk about in the beginning of the book when you kind of talk about preaching historically has been about, getting to heaven, not about the here and now. And relate those two, kind of tell our readers about that, because it was just, I don't know, something that an epiphany I had, I talked to Mitch about and have talked about a lot since, about just life as energy and what exactly is our role in life and beyond.
Yes. Well, first, Missy, I have a deep empathy with the loss of your mother to dementia, because I had care of my mother for the last 5 years of her life when she was descending in dementia. And I don't know how it was for you and your mom. My mom, some people, as they descend into dementia, the sweetest and kindest parts of them disappear and leave the other parts. In my mother, she was mostly sweet and kind, and that's all that was left at the end. She couldn't remember a huge part of her life, and yet the sweetness and kindness was still there. But it was sad and beautiful and heartbreaking and all the rest. So my heart goes out to you in that. That energy epiphany is a little bit hard to explain, isn't it?
It is. I was hoping you could do a better job than me.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I will not be able to do as good a job as the way it's written in the book. But I suppose a way I could say it very briefly is this: when you realize that energy is when you start to see how everything we humans do is about energy. We go to make money. Well, what is money? Well, money is a symbolic thing, numbers, that allows us to get other people's energy to do things for us.
Yeah.
Everything we do with money is just an exchange of human energy. Of course, gasoline and oil and coal, the reason they became so powerful and dominant in the world is that they're the residue of solar energy that was trapped through photosynthesis into carbon, that we learned how to burn the carbon and release the energy. So it was solar energy 100 million years ago that gets taken into leaves and eaten by dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs die and their decomposing bodies become oil, and we burn the oil, and all that is conserved energy. And then I realized, well, it wasn't just fossil fuels. When we built all those ships to carry grain around, grain is energy, wheat and corn. It's last season's solar energy. That's why and when we cut down trees, it's to get the energy out of the tree, and it's all sort of solar energy, when you think about it. And then once you realize that in human affairs, oh my goodness, it just starts spreading. You realize, for example, that when you have a teacher and the teacher helps you learn how to do things, in a sense, she increases your the power that you have to get things done, because now you can work smarter, not just harder, right? And a lot of education is helping us learn how to discover and use energy. So it's one of those things that just spreads through life, and you realize it's all about energy.
I feel like we could go deep in the weeds with this, because it just my physics teacher from high school keeps the mantra, energy is neither created nor destroyed, just transferred. And so I remember watching my mom and thinking, that energy doesn't just disappear. It doesn't just go up into the clouds in some mysterious place. That energy it's with us. And I love that kind of imagery of what our impact on the world that we're living in. And so I'm not doing a very good job of describing it. You do a beautiful job in this book. And so I so appreciated that.
Yeah.
Your mother ate a lot of food in the course of her life that she got energy from. She used a lot of that energy to create your little body inside of her body. You were born. She used energy from the sun through plants and animals and food to raise you and nurture you and care for you. And she put her imprint on you so that she in some way lives in you, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh my goodness. It's all this beautiful love energy transfer. It's just amazing.
And all I hear is indigenous wisdom.
It's so true.
Oozing from this
All
conversation.
right, fine, you're right.
Because I mean, just you think about just the importance of ancestors, indigenous cultures, and
Yes.
their presence. It's not just memory; it's their presence, their spiritual, mental, emotional presence within you.
Mm-hmm.
And one day I will transfer that to our sons, which I already have, and our grandchildren, and so on.
I probably would have behaved a lot differently as a mom if I had known that.
Well, Brian, I've got one last question for you before I hand it over to Missy and our final question. And that is, so the title of your book is Life After Doom. And I want to take umbrage with that a little bit because as I read through the material, it almost seemed as though life within doom, because you do talk about the ecological crisis that we are in. But at the end of the book, you end us in a moment of inspiration because you still embrace the beauty of being human within this world. So you talk about that dream. So Brian, what is your dream and how can you keep such a positive attitude when the situation looks so bleak right now?
Yeah. Well, I'm sure I don't always have a positive attitude, but
well, that inner fundamentalist, I'm sure, does come out.
yeah. And there are times I'm just so sad,
Yeah, sure.
I'm just so sad. And there are times I'm so angry because one of the ways that people use energy is when people are afraid, and people are looking for someone to blame. There are people who know how to manipulate that energy. So all those things, are there too. But there's this beautiful quote from Robin Wall Kimmerer. She says, even as this is a very loose paraphrase,
Mm-hmm.
even as we're harming the earth continues to give us joy.
Yeah.
She said, so I have to keep joy because it's what the earth is giving to me. If I were to turn away that gift of joy, it would just add to the tragedy, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, I'll just give you an example. I'm sitting here looking out my window, and in my backyard, I live in Florida. I have some mango trees, and it's mango season right now. And I got to tell you, the joy of tasting an incredible mango, right? Fresh off the tree. The earth is giving me that joy. I'm looking out the window right now. The sun shining on the leaves is just, and when you know a little bit about photosynthesis, and I think the light of the sun 93 million miles away is energizing chemical reactions in those leaves that create life. And oh my gosh, you just feel the beauty of it. I'm 68 years old. Last night, I saw the most beautiful sunset. The most beautiful rainbow of my life.
Wow.
I have never seen a rainbow as vibrant and intense and long lasting as I saw last night. And I happened to be on my kayak in the water so that I saw an arc of the rainbow going up in the sky and an arc of the rainbow mirrored on the water. I mean, that's the world gives us so much joy. And if we want to speak of God, it's the way God gives us joy is through the gift of this earth and this life and each moment. So, I mean the same. And when we see human beings harming this beautiful earth, including its human creatures, then of course, then it makes us sad and it makes us want to do everything we can to preserve the good. Yeah.
Well, Brian, we greatly appreciate this conversation today. Brian's brand new book is Life After Doom. You can pick it up in bookstores right now. And let me tell you, Missy's right. There's that one chapter that should be essential reading for anybody. right now. It is just very, very well done.
Actually, all the chapters.
All the
chapters. I'm just saying.
Well, Brian, before we let you go, and hey, we're going to see you in a couple of weeks at Wild Goose, so we're excited to see you in North Carolina.
Yes,
Absolutely,
let's do it.
absolutely. But before we let you go today, Missy's got one final question for you.
All right, Brian. So as you know, our tagline at Good Faith Media is "There's more to tell." So in light of your work in our conversation today, what is your more to tell?
Well, there's a sentence I wish I would have added in the book. I didn't think of it until afterwards. There's a couple of sentences, but here's the one I would like to tell. Part of what I'm trying to do in the book is trying to help people acknowledge that we don't know what's going to happen. I spell out 4 scenarios. And I don't know which one of them it will be. And I don't have the power to guarantee any of them. I know what I want to contribute to, whatever scenario unfolds. And so here's the sentence I wish I would have put in the book. I don't know what's going to happen, but I know how I want to show up.
Oh, love that.
Wow. Yeah. Folks, you heard it here first. Now I'm going to need a minute to marinate on that one too.
Well, Brian, again, it is always a joy to talk to you, my friend. Thank you so much for your ministry, for your advocacy, and for this book, Life After Doom. It is wonderful.
Thank you so much. What an honor to be with you. Look forward to seeing you in a couple of weeks.
Well, Missy, I don't think there is any better human being than Brian McLaren.
I agree wholeheartedly. And I am still marinating on his more to tell, the line he said he wanted to put in his book. I'm just going to be thinking about this quite a bit. But he said, I don't know what's going to happen, but I know how I want to show up. Yeah. And how powerful is that statement when you can release yourself and say, I don't know.
Yeah.
We could self-destruct tomorrow, and I don't know. But I'm going to show up in the way that in very intentional ways.
And he's been showing up for a long time, because he showed up for this young seminary student almost 20 years ago, when, after reading his book, A New Kind of Christian, that really changed my life and helped me put into perspective what I was going through at the time, I reached out to him knowing that he was going to be a speaker at the Cooperative Baptist Fellowship in Charlotte, North Carolina. And I didn't think he would respond. I mean, he's this big author, big public figure, and he did. And he said, hey, meet me after my speech and we'll talk. Well, I walked up to the podium there, and he was talking to people, signing autographs. And I thought, he's going to give me 30.
You'll get a quick autograph, a pat on the head.
Exactly. But no, he not only whisked me out of the auditorium, which I thought we were going to get a coffee. We go out of the convention center, and we walk across the street to this park. And he said, hey, let's sit here. And we sat on this park bench, and for the next 2 hours, we had one of the most authentic, genuine conversations that I ever had. And I can't tell you how much I needed that at that moment and that time. I do not know one word that we spoke about. Can't recall one sentence. But I will never forget his presence at that moment and his ability to show up for this nobody that just meant the world to me.
Oh, you're going to make me tear up. He did. He just has this very Mr. Rogers-esque
yes, he does.
presence about him, and so genuine and so thoughtful and brilliant, clearly. Yeah. But, he showed up for you, and that sets you on a trajectory, to be able to show up for others. Yeah. And that just, and I don't know that he'll ever really conceptualize that. And how many other yous were there that he showed up for, and that ripple effect that went on. Yeah. And I think that's just such an amazing
that
story.
Moment influenced not only my local parish ministry for, over a decade after that, but then taking this position with Baptist Center for Ethics, now Good Faith Media, just being able to show up and to vocalize the needs of this world, to call out injustices everywhere and to call people to justice and to embrace beauty and joy and hope for the future. And Brian is all about that. And that's one of the great things about this job that you and I have at Good Faith Media, because we get to encounter people and organizations that continue to show up for people. Whether that is the marches of 2020 after George Floyd's death, and people took to the streets demanding policing reform, whether it's more recently women going to the streets along with men demanding reproductive rights for women. Time and time again, we see people showing up. Moms demand action, showing up at the Capitol, demanding new gun legislation, safe gun legislation. We see people demonstrating around the world, led by a teenager, Greta Thunberg, talking about climate change and the desperate need for us to make a change in the way we're living, just so other people can simply live. And so we are inspired by all of these people showing up. We do not realize the importance and the power of what showing up means to others.
And don't sell yourself short, mister. You have been showing up for others along the way, too. I know you are somebody who's going to always put somebody else in the spotlight, but you yourself, mister, have been showing up for years.
Well, thank you. I appreciate
and
that.
I just want to say, as we close out today, that, Brian said he didn't put that sentence in the book and that he wished that he had, but I will say he has put that sentence on his life. He has put that sentence on the world.
Yeah.
And that is the gift that we have been given by his presence, by his writing, by the time that he's given to us, to you, and then now to both of us on this podcast. So I am ever grateful for him showing up in the world the way that he does.
He will be a forever guest on Good Faith Weekly. So, we will not be here next week because of the 4th of July holiday, but we'll be back the week after. And so until that time, keep living good faith. You've been listening to Good Faith Weekly, hosted by Mitch and Missy Randall. This weekly podcast from Good Faith Media discusses matters of faith and culture.
Subscribe wherever you get your podcast and give us a like and a glowing review. We produce the podcast out of Norman, Oklahoma. Our music comes from Pond 5.
And we're supported by listeners like you. Learn more about us at goodfaithmedia.org.